This is the India development debate. Now, Singapore is going to overtake Australia to have Asia's highest share of millionaires in the adult population by the year 2030. This is what is getting indicated through a report that has been put out by HSBC Holdings. In absolute terms, mainland China is expected to have around 50 million millionaires, again, by the year 2030. Singapore, of course, is expected to top that list in the Asia-Pacific region, followed by Australia, Hong Kong and Taiwan. The proportion of millionaires in these four countries is also expected to come in higher than the US by the end of the decade. India, meanwhile, could house more than 6 million, which would amount about 1% of all adults in India. Let's look at the possibilities that perhaps could emerge with that kind of millionaire population within India and within Asia. What this report is talking about. To do this, Zico Dasgupta is joining us. He's an economist and an assistant professor at the Azim Premji University. And Rahman Junaid is managing director and chief researcher at Hurun. Great to have you both, gentlemen. Mr. Dasgupta, first to you. It's not just India, really, but this report is indicating that Vietnam and the Philippines are also likely to see the number of adults holding wealth of at least $250,000 more than double by the year 2030. That's what the report is saying. Is this natural for a developing economy, or is the pace at which these developing countries are turning out millionaires faster than what we've seen in the past compared, say, to the US or any of the Western world as they developed into the developed economies as we see them today?
Well, I think there are two issues at hand. First of all, of course, there is a question of overall growth performance of different countries. And most of the countries that you mentioned has been East Asian countries who have been particularly doing well as far as their exports are concerned, including Vietnam. That would be one issue that needs to be noted. And I think secondly, what also needs to be noted is the sharp rise in the income and wealth inequality. So even if an economy is growing at a certain pace, there would be a certain section, and as you said, somewhere around 1% or 10%, whose income share or wealth share has been increasing faster than the overall size of the economy of the cake. I think both the reasons can, it can make, such a scenario in the coming years.
Mr. Junaid, the growing inequality, though, the difference between the haves and the have-nots, that's becoming larger. It's becoming more significant. How do economies bridge that gap as they develop further in your understanding? How does the availability of resources, whether it's capital or other resources, lift the millions out of poverty as the economies grow, as they prosper?
I think the essential part of growing inequality has been the very manner in which different economies has been witnessing growth. If one needs to reduce inequality, if one needs to increase the labor income, there needs to be some form of fiscal intervention. Unfortunately, given the policy framework that most of the countries follow, including India, there is very little space, fiscal space, to bring about meaningful expenditures. So think about our country, where labor income has been on the lower end in the recent period. And yet there has been limitations in increasing government expenditures because of the given fiscal rules. I think this is high time, particularly after the COVID crisis, that one needs to rethink about different kinds of policy frameworks that we are dealing with in order to boost labor income and use some of the fiscal measures.
Junaid, coming to you for this, Asia's financial wealth has exceeded that of the US since the aftermath of the global financial crisis. I'm asking you, what has fundamentally changed since the financial crisis, how hard it hit us, and the primary reasons, according to you, that the number of millionaires is actually going up in Asia and in India? What has fundamentally changed for that to happen?
You're asking me?
I was asking Mr. Junaid. Mr. Junaid, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, I can. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I basically want to touch upon the first part of the discussion. We do something, we've been analyzing the wealth distribution across the countries. And as per our analysis, China currently has about $5.5 million households at present. And our assumption is about China has about 3.5 individuals per household, which translates to about roughly 15 million millionaires, 15 million $1 million, 15 million individuals with $1 million assets or not at this point in China. And if you just do a comparison with that statistics to where we are, in India, look at the GDP and all that stuff. Even if you look at the Hurun India richness and compare that with the number of billionaires in China, India has always been 10 years behind China when it comes to wealth creation. So if you simply follow that path, the moment, the day when India possibly hit, 8 trillion or 9 trillion by 2030 in terms of GDP, if we can hit that kind of numbers, this kind of millionaire households in India by around that time, it's very much possible is what I think. That's just to give you some data on the millionaire households. What was your second question?
The question that I was asking you is about the change that we've seen fundamentally after the global financial crisis of 2008. What has shifted that we are seeing as many millionaires joining the ranks, as it were, as far as the world millionaire population is concerned? What has really happened?
I can speak from an Indian perspective. I don't have much knowledge about the rest of the world, but from an Indian context, over the last few years, significantly after when Hurun started in 2012 in India, over the last few years, what we've seen is there has been a rising income level, which has been across middle class, which has resulted in possibly the increased number of millionaires. And specifically speaking about from a rich list perspective, a lot of new wealth has been created from startups, new economies. Then you can see the companies maturing, which would mean that a lot of new wealth is being created amongst the professional managers as well. So the wealth creation is happening across the country. Just to give you one more statistic, when we launched the India Rich List in 2012, the number of people in the rich list was from about 22 cities in India. Now, fast forward 10 years later, we have about participation from 72 cities. Around 72 cities have produced entrants into rich list. So you could see wealth creation happening across the board, across the country, region, age group, and all that stuff. So I hope I answered your question.
It does give us an indication of what is really changing. But Mr. Dasgupta, how will more millionaires change the nature of the Indian economy, according to you? Will it change the way we consume, our consumption patterns? Will they alter? And who will benefit the most? And perhaps who will lose out, according to you?
No, I think any change in income distribution or wealth distribution would be associated with consumption pattern. It has been the case in our country. Typically, the consumption basket of the rich has been very distinct, very different from the consumption basket of the bottom deciles. So if the inequality is rising, there would be change in the consumption pattern in favor of, say, consumer durables or technologically sophisticated consumption goods. That has been the case. Secondly, who would gain out of that? Even during the COVID, when the sales growth was falling and the GDP growth rate was negative, there was, the corporate profits went up, and that has been the case that when the GDP growth rate rises, profitability has increased even faster. When the GDP growth rate has declined, even then the corporate profits have increased. So it has been a systematic pattern in the Indian economy that there has been a secular trend of rise in the profit share, rise in the income share of top 1%, rise in the wealth share of top 1%. And given the trajectory of the Indian economy, it seems it might go on if the policy framework is not changed.
I'm just wondering how many of these millionaires are going to come from our startup ecosystem, and perhaps you might have statistics about the growth of our startup ecosystem, Mr. Junaid. Over there too, we've had plenty of hiccups. Funds have been drying up, layoffs have been taking place. Do you see pitfalls along the way that could stop the march of these millionaires to be, especially when it comes to the entrepreneurial world, because there are great hopes pegged of them? We are talking about the formation of a lot of unicorns in times to come, and those times are not far away. So do you have any stats that would indicate how the startup ecosystem is doing, and perhaps it indicates how it's likely to grow and how many millionaires are going to come from that universe?
So I can definitely give you a couple of statistics about which clearly explains how the startup ecosystem has really changed the face of wealth creation in India. Again, go back to when we launched the list in 2012. There was absolutely no founders from no startup founders in the rich list at that point in time. Now, 10 years later, there were about 80 founders from the various startups who featured the list. The number has grown up by 80. Now, another thing that this startup wealth creation does is the age when the wealth is created. This possibly answers some of the questions on disposable income, consumer spending, and all that stuff. So when we started the list in 2012, the youngest in the Hurun India rich list was about 33 years old. Now the youngest is 23 years old, the rich list. So the startup ecosystem is definitely going to accelerate wealth creation in the country, reduce the age by which someone becomes a millionaire, the professionals creating more wealth, all that's going to increase. So I would like to assume that out of this, the so-called number in terms of, let's say, 5 million or 6 million millionaires, which is going to come in 2030, I wouldn't be surprised if, let's say, even 1 million out of that comes from very young, startup, vibrant entrepreneurs. And I really also believe that the next decade, the wealth creation is going to be driven by possibly two categories of entrepreneurs. One is, of course, the startup founders. The second is, of course, going to be the professionals who's going to be very active in helping family-run businesses with the professionalizing the whole business. So you would see a lot more wealth creation coming from that. And of course, the third very important category is investors, angel investors, who possibly would have exited and investing more capital. So these are sort of three categories that could generate a lot of millionaires in times to come from India.
It is a substantial contribution that the startup world is going to make when it comes to the number of millionaires in India. But Mr. Dasgupta, I'll let you have the final word on this. When you try and create a correlation between the number of millionaires that India is going to have by the year 2030 and the possibility of India becoming a developed country by the year 2047, the way the Prime Minister envisages it, do you see it? Is there a direct correlation that you see in how wealth is created and the number of people who have that kind of wealth that we're talking about?
Well, not necessarily. And as you said, that ultimately when one is talking about the bunch of people who are getting better off, it would be roughly around 1%, or at most one can go by, say, 10%. The question is, number one, whether for the bulk of the population, the income growth rate is rising fast enough or not. I think there are many constraints at this point of time. One set of reasons posed by global economic shocks, different kind, including different kinds of cost push inflation and a possibility of global economic slowdown. But also there is some lack of policy frameworks to address many of the issues of income of labor, particularly, and issues of inequality. So there are great challenges, and getting a quite amount of millionaires does not guarantee that India gets developed. One requires additional effort to do that, it seems.
It's going to be a huge effort, no doubt. Of course, there is a country with its vibrant population that hopes to achieve that target sooner rather than later. Though we live in difficult times, a global slowdown is upon us, and we are trying to be as resilient as possible through this kind of span of time after the pandemic. We'll see how it goes, and we'll keep checking in with our economists, including you, Mr. Dasgupta, and Mr. Junaid. Thank you so much for joining us with your perspective on this report. We will wrap things up on this edition of India Development Debate. I'm Vikram Oza from me and the team. Thank you so much for joining us, but much more coming up right after the break, so keep it with us. Good night.